Welcome to a new Harry's Garage video, and this video is going to be my sort of 6 month, 4,500 mile update on my Lotus Emira. Can't believe the last one I did was last year when we got back from that trip to Italy. We've done 2,500 miles last time I updated on this, and in that intervening time I expected there to be loads of sort of press events, group tests, etc., but it seems to be a dearth of information around this car from a journalistic point of view. There's 1 or 2 videos out, but no big group tests and that sort of thing. So I thought, well, I ought to share some of my findings over 6 months, 4,500 miles, using the car generally, all sorts of things, bigger trips, short trips into London, that sort of thing. I'm also going to go through some sort of handling quirks I've discovered on the car, some I think quite interesting look at the weight distribution on this car against its rivals, and also the market. Whether this car, I'm pleased I bought it, or whether I'm thinking of going out, what its rivals are, having lived with it, how do I see it sitting in the market, that sort of thing. But just kicking off with the car itself. Well, it's continued to perform. I was looking at the niggles I came up with 2,500 miles, and I said rear hatch, that water issue, never puts water in the boot. And there are drain holes that then drain the water away. It's a non-issue. Wipers faulty. That's strange things the wipers are doing. I've checked with Lotus, the update is coming, it's not quite there. You put it on interval wipe and it does all the interval wipe as you expect. And then the rain starts to get heavier and it doesn't actually change speed. Very odd. If you do go set off in heavy rain, it does the 2-speed wiper and it's fine. The other day on the motorway it was doing it again, and then after about 10 minutes it went to full speed. I don't know, it's a software issue. It doesn't bug me at all. I'm not getting upset about it. It will be done on the first service as far as I'm concerned, or as soon as a software update is available. Other things, I've noticed some people comment that they've seen sort of engine lights on or limp-home mode appear. I have had engine light on and I've had a limp home once, and the engine light on came when I'd left it in here for several weeks, not on charge. And I think it's a voltage thing, that one. If you leave modern cars parked up, there is a constant drain on the battery these days, and I think if it gets a slightly low volt, the coding can throw up the odd fault when there isn't one. Every time I've stopped the car, started it up, and it's gone. But what I do now, if I know I'm going to leave it for more than a few days, I plug in a C-Tech charger. All the cars are generally on C-Tech charger, but because I've been running around with this one, I hadn't really bothered. Now I've plugged one in, and I've never seen that light again. The limp home one, once in Wales, no reason, sitting on a roundabout, lights changed, somebody's noticed limp home, that's odd. Pulled over, stopped it, started it, gone. Never seen it since. So I can't report it as a fault. It's just a glitch, is how I'd put it. One final one, in the winter, it chucked it down to rain all December and into January. And this car was sitting outside the house, and every now and then it seemed to steam up more. When you went to start it, it sort of, the windows fogged up, and it took a while to clear. Bit peculiar. It's almost as though it was taken in water. Couldn't see a leak, but now it's sort of dried up. It was only through, it was just raining every single day. It was sat out there. We were getting in wet coats, wet bags, but it just seemed always to have a bit of mistiness to clear before you could set off. But that's gone away as well. They're the niggles. The positives, I still love the way it looks. It just pleases me when I see the design. It looks fresh, it looks modern, it doesn't look super aggressive. It just looks great. And lots of people comment on it. I would much rather there was a more expensive sort of colours you could have chosen for this car. The limited colours, I'd never have the yellow one, I'd never have the blue one, so it's red, green, or this colour. But this colour with that bronze fleck in it and this Nimbus grey, I think works really well. I'm a fan of silver wheels, so I don't regret for one moment the spec of this car. Another thing I want to talk about are the seats. There's lots of chatter that the seats don't really go low enough. And seats in a modern car have to be in a certain position. There's an H point here, and side impact, etc., legislation of what that has to be. And I think this is a perception, the fact that people worry or are concerned the seat doesn't go low enough. Because I look out, I am 6'1", 6'2", I feel low looking at this wheel, looking at the dash. I'm sort of having to peer over, but I've got a great view out. And the real different point, if I just close the door on this car, is normally a belt line as it's termed. This line here, this window, is normally dead straight, and it'll come across and it's about here. But on this Emira, the design has been very clever because that dips down, and unusually I can see quite a lot of road below the mirror. Now normally that door is there, and so there's a perception, I believe, when you're sitting here, oh, I must be too high because that looks really low, I should be lower. Well, I've got plenty of height above my head, and it's one of those, once you've lived with it, the seating position is superb. The visibility, because of this way this comes down and you have this huge view and this glorious mirror design. I think it's an epic shaped mirror. It's all because of that lowering that belt line there, that line there just gives you the perception that, oh, perhaps I'm sitting a bit high. You're not. It's just the very clever designers have made visibility out as good as they could make it. Again, I'm going to say on the interior, I just love the modernity of it. I'm a big fan of the way this dash works here. And the other big thing I've noticed, it never fails to connect CarPlay. I can put on Waze just as I'm going to go, where am I going? And I'll put it on my phone, don't think about it, get in the car, start a button, in seconds it's up on the dash and we're routed and we're off. It is terrific. I don't have the things falling over. It just works as far as I can see. Temperature wise, I notice I'm always at 24 degrees when other cars I have 21 or something like that. This one I always need to crank it up to get the same temperature out. But yeah, all working well in here. It's wearing relatively well. People talk about this sort of rough gear change. Don't think it's a lovely change on it. Slightly heavy on the clutch, I suppose, but I really like the super strong brakes, solid pedal, dead easy to heel and toe in it as well, as you'd sort of expect from a Lotus. Another point I want to make is the boot space. And the boot, I discovered, I thought it was quite big. When we went on that trip all around Europe, etc., I thought it was quite big. And I thought it was quite big until I tried to put a carry-on bag in the boot and discovered, oh, I can't do that. That was a bit of a surprise because I thought it was quite big, but actually the only place to put that is behind the passenger seat or on the passenger seat. I think that's a bit of an oversight. I would expect a bag like that to go in this boot. Engine hasn't used any water, any oil or anything like that. MPG wise, it's a bit of a struggle to get it to go over 30 mpg. I find sort of high 20s when I'm just motorway cruising, but if you start using the horsepower and driving more enthusiastic, shall we say, it's soon down to 20 or perhaps a little bit lower. Now what I'm going to talk about here regarding handling is the weight distribution front to rear on this car, because I think it's quite an interesting point to make. People think this is a Cayman rival, and you can sort of see that it's the same price point, same power, etc. But it has a fundamental difference in its makeup when it comes to handling, in my view, because it's much closer to 911 handling than it is to a Cayman. And that's because it's much more rear bias on the weight distribution. This car is 62-38 front. That is the same roughly as a 911 today, 991 or 997, but a Cayman is very different. Cayman is 55 rear, 45 front, so much heavier on the front, much better balance, mid-engine sort of layout. This is more rear bias. This is very close to having a 911. What it is matches the 911 on weight distribution. And you've got to remember that. If you're really pushing this car, you've got to think, I've got a rear weight bias here. I can use it to my advantage, but I've got to be aware of it because it won't be as neutral at the extremities that perhaps a Cayman would be. But there's a big positive there. If a Cayman 4 litre and this are roughly the same weight, and with the weight distribution of this, that means there's a roughly 550 kilos across the front axle. On the Cayman, there's 650 kilos over the axle, and obviously 100 kilos less at the rear, so there'd be 900 kilos across the rear axle on this and 800 on the Cayman. And that lighter 100 kilos on the front, I think, is what gives this car its edge in the steering feel, because you hardly need any assistance. You imagine a car with 550 kilos on the front. If you had, like my Elan, this sort of 50-50 weight distribution, slide to the rear, that would be the only way you get 550 kilos on the front axle is if you had a car that weighed a ton. You basically don't need power steering, and I think that's the ace amongst this Emira. In actual fact, it's super light on its steering. The lovely thing with this car, I feel, is the way it feels down the road. This Lotus feel, I think, has a lot to do with that weight distribution. Now, I spoke about, it's heavier over the rear and you've got to be aware of it when you drive it. The key difference between this and a 911 is the 911's got a flat 6 engine and all the weight is down low. On the Lotus, it's got a Toyota V6 with a great big supercharger on top. So I think the centre of gravity is higher on this car, and I think Lotus have done very well to balance the handling, to make it as neutral as it is. But I'm always thinking in my back of my mind, there is a possibility when it all lets go, I've got a higher centre of gravity to deal with. But there's compliance, and because the car is easy to read, I never find it an issue, but I am aware of that problem. And then this is on touring spec and sport spec. I personally think this was a big mistake by Lotus, because they're so close in the settings, and it delayed people sort of placing their final order because they wanted to drive the car, decide which one, and there's hardly any difference between the two. But I still think touring is the one to go for. It hasn't got the super sport seats in it, hasn't got the Cup 2s. I wouldn't go Cup 2. This is my ideal. This is a road car. This is like the old Esprit. That most 99% of the Esprits were for driving everyday usage, and the seats aren't up to real track work and that sort of thing. It's a manual, it's to enjoy, it's a driver's car. And the final point, the market and the pricing of this car. Now, we all got excited in July 21 when Lotus announced the prices and did the big launch for the Emira, and they priced the base car, the i4, at $59,995. And I thought that was a bit too cheap, really. I was amazed, actually, they were going to create the car for that. I obviously went for first edition when I ordered this, something like 72 before extras. I know the time I added all the extras on my car, I put a 3-year service plan on it, vehicle tracker, home link, steering wheel, black Alcantara. It was 82,000 on the road. You've got to remember there's about £2,500 road fund licence to pay on your first year on an Emira. Since then, we've had this announcement of a price rise of £6,000 for all cars delivered after June. I think it was just inevitable. Lotus didn't time it very well, this. First of all, we had COVID completely messing up supply chain, and then we had a war, and then we had the energy shock because of the war. This is a nightmare time for manufacturers. In any market, it is huge price pressure. Everything has dramatically gone up. I did that story of Gordon Murray on his T33 Spider. He's talking about 40% rise in the price of supplies to make his T33, T50, etc. So the price rise was inevitable. I'm surprised it's only £6,000, because the big thing I didn't get my head around when they launched this car, it was cheaper than Evora. And they were trying, I believe, to get round that by producing a greater volume of cars per year and by doing away with dealer margin. The dealer became an agent and they were selling direct, and actually it made it very easy to order online. It's almost, Lotus created a problem for themselves, because it was dead easy to place a deposit and say, oh, I've ordered up an Emira, because you just did it online, job done. And they got the 10,000 or so orders. And I see today in the press, they sold 641 cars in 22. They were hoping to get about 2,500, 3,000 of these cars out, 3,500 a year. They've still got 3-year order bank in there already. Yes, there's probably a trickle of cancellations with interest rates shooting up and people hesitating and home budgets getting constrained. but it's nothing compared to the order bank that Lotus is sitting on and desperately trying to get these cars out. The other thing you've got to be aware of is legislation and the fact they go through gateways and more requirements as the years tick by, the months tick by, and we've got a big one coming in July 24. That's when the base car will be arriving, and it's still not exactly decided how a low volume, what requirements it will need on its cars to hit the requirements coming in July 24. I would hate to be behind the scenes at Lotus trying to wade through this quagmire of legislation coming from EU and from the US, etc. Lane assist, speed awareness, speed warning if you're going over the speed limit, all sorts of tech we don't want in our sports car, but the regulators are insisting we do have them. So price pressure will stay there. And I also think that order bank and the price rises, the last thing they actually need at the moment is even more demand for this car. And I wonder if that's why the press they're not really doing the group tests, etc., that we would expect to see on Emira. Just they don't want any more orders. They just want to satisfy the people, get those orders out to everyone who's ordered one. I've been pestering them for a drive in the i4, and I was told, oh, December time, it was going to be about April. I've been delayed, I think it's July time. They're trying to time the press drives of the i4 with when first customers are getting their cars as well. They do not want this length of time in between. So that's when you're going to see drives. It's quite a way off. I also think the V6 version, this version, it's pretty easy for them to get it out into production because this is basically an Evora V6. There wasn't a huge number of changes. The i4 though, completely different engine, brand new engine, and crucially I think turbocharged. And that turbocharger sits right next to that bulkhead. And they've never used, as far as I can think, that engine has never been used in a mid-engine car. And this car hasn't got a massive amount of air going into here. It hasn't got like a vented top here that could let all the heat out. I wonder if that heat of that turbo is causing a slight delay as well, because they've got to do a lot of gateway cycles, which is just normal, which is engineering practice, but they'll be very insistent that it passes all tests before releasing the i4. The other thing about this car, it's got a completely flat floor, so how are they going to get the air to that turbo? The other bit I'm surprised on the i4, it's not that much lighter than this car anyway. So I thought it would have quite a weight saving, but it seems to be 20-30 kilos, that's all. And that's because the dual clutch transmission is always a heavier transmission than a manual transmission. And still now, this is my #1 choice. And I just look at it as the price at 70,000-80,000. That's still a lot less than any other mid-engine car as good looking as this. Think of today's interest rates. If you're paying £180,000 for a car, that extra 100,000 will cost you an extra £12,000 a month to just finance it, let alone pay any capital off. So all cars are getting expensive. We saw that M2 coming out, that would be sort of £70,000. A mid-engine, low production Lotus at 80,000 still sounds very good value to me, and it's still cheaper than the Evora. So yeah, rivals, I mean, you've got Aston Martin, the Vantage, they're dropping into this sort of bracket. They're a different car. You're going to have much higher service costs than with the Lotus, and just generally higher costs all round. I would still choose this because of the steering feel, because of the looks, and just the romance on the Lotus. I took a friend out who owns a 911 GTS, and we just went into London a couple of weeks ago. He was amazed at the reaction this car gets. You get let out at junctions, unheard of in a Porsche GTS or something more aggressive. So I think it is a car for time. I feel very sorry for Lotus that they launched into this storm of issues, COVID, war, etc. But I'm still enjoying my time with it, as you can probably tell. I hope there's a much higher supply of cars coming their way. The other thing I'd just say on residuals as well, is if you're appealing to a mass market, Lotus owners might like bright yellow cars or bright blue cars, but they're not ever going to be great for residuals. It's unfortunately, we are quite a conservative lot car buyers, and if those people who might go into a Lotus that hadn't had one before would want the Porsche colours, we could call it, or the BMW and the Audi colours. They don't want the leery, loud, traditional Lotus colours. I think that might be an issue on residuals as well. But I view it as my junior GT3 Touring. That is the car I would choose over this. The rivals I would look at is GT3 Touring, but it's so flipping quick and it's so much more money than this. Weirdly, the Ferrari Roma, I could really quite enjoy there, but they're too much money. So I'm sitting here. The only thing I would love this car to be would be a convertible. And I've asked them several times, they have no interest in doing a convertible because this car will probably be gone in 2006-7. That was the theory, because then the electric sports car comes from Lotus. But there's that little glimmer of hope with Porsche and the e-fuels, and whether that means internal combustion engines will carry on. But then you've got UK government say, no, it's a 2030 ban, that's it, no more internal combustion engines, e-fuels or nothing, they're all gone by 2030. Who knows what the future is, but I'm just going to enjoy it while we've got this sort of car. I think it's still a good buy in the market if you can get hold of one. And I feel sorry for everyone on the waiting list, but it will come eventually, and then you're going to have an absolute ball. So there you go. There's a 6-month, 4,500 mile update on the Lotus Emira. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, keep watching, keep subscribing, more videos coming along very soon.